So we welcome you all today. You are all an important member of the early childhood system of care in your communities and in your state. And thank you for being here. And for those of you, again, who said other, please tell us what that other is that we didn't include in our list. You can.
All right, thank you all so much for being here. And we really want to start off with mindfulness. So mindfulness is one of our building blocks. And it's something that we like to do at the beginning of presentations, whether we're doing a training or working with teachers or working with directors. And we just want to give you a little bit of a taste of that. So this is a 1-minute video that's just a quick mindfulness activity. And during this video, you can turn off your camera if you'd like to. You can take a minute for yourself with us. And Ennis, you could go ahead and start that.
And one of the things we always encourage people to do is turn off your camera before you do this so you can not worry about how you look. There you go.
I want you to start by placing both hands on your heart. Take a big breath in, feel your breath rise, and a long breath out, exhale. And start to feel your heartbeat, the beauty of being you and being alive in your own skin. Yeah, the one thing that you have that nobody else has is you. Your voice, your mind, your story, your vision. So live as only you can. The one that you are looking for is you. Set your intention for the day. Practice gratitude for how amazing you are. Shine your light wherever you go. You are beautiful and blessed.
Thank you all so much for participating in that with us. And one of the things I really love about that is really getting that biofeedback from your heartbeat. So I hope that's something that y'all can think about, just how much of a difference that 1 minute made.
Thank you, Lauren. So now we're going to ask you to tell us a little bit about how you are. One of the reasons we use mindfulness is it helps us be a little more aware of how we are, how we're feeling. So using the instructions that are on the screen now, you have two options, either to text, and the phone number you're texting to is 37607. You first send that text and then it responds to that, and then you can text in one word to tell us how you're feeling. Or you can go by the link. Is that in the chat now? Jessica, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat to go to this link, that will give you the option to do the same thing, but on a screen, on the same screen you're looking at right now, which will take you away from us for a minute, but you can come back. So we'd love for you to just share a little bit about how you're feeling right now. We'll come back to that later to find out your responses. It'll create a nice visual for us. So now we're just going to briefly introduce ourselves to you and then see what we found out about how you're feeling today. Sharon?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharon Little, ITTI Project Coach. Welcome.
And we are not going to read what's on our slides. Again, you have them to refer to, and you can hear more about us there. And I will go next to Lauren.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren Thomason, and I am another ITTI Project Coach.
And you've met me, but I'm Ennis Baker and I am the project director.
And I am Katie Rosanbalm, and I am a research scientist with the Center for Child and Family Policy and the principal investigator, I guess you would call me, of this project. I'm really excited to be able to share it with you all today.
Let's see what you've told us.
So if we look here at this wonderful word wall that we get from all of your single words of how you're doing, you can see really standing out, overwhelmed and tired. And yes, that is exactly where we all are. It has been a year. It has been an exhausting, long year. But I see a few people in there who are also feeling relaxed, blessed, hopeful, great, happy, energized. that's impressive that you've got that in this moment after all this wonderful year that we've gone through together. But I do think that along with the exhaustion, we've come to a different sense of prioritizing what we have in our lives and what matters to us in our day-to-day existence. And I hope that you find small moments of that, and building in mindfulness, like we practiced just a moment, is a really nice way when you've just had that overwhelmed day to just settle in and take a break just for yourself. Watch this wall change. I love this.
And I will say we use this a lot, and overwhelmed is always the biggest word.
This year it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And often before this year with the groups we were working with.
Excellent. So we are going to be presenting to you all today a little bit about our project, which is called the Infant Toddler Trauma Informed Project, or ITTI Care. So we call it ITTI Care because while we are talking about trauma informed care in early childhood, it's really so much more than that. And you're going to hear a lot of us talking about that as this presentation goes on. But it's really about the stress that each of us feels in our lives, and how do we get the care that we need for ourselves? How do we take care of one another? And how do we build that resilience and connection with other people in our lives? We're definitely going to be talking some about how this links with equity-centered, racial equity, resilience-based work, as well as early childhood mental health. So you'll hear us speak some about that. We'll tell you some about the model itself, and then we'll delve a little bit into a couple of the aspects that we spend the most time talking about when we're working with early childhood professionals.
Thank you, Katie. So this is an image you saw in the title for our presentation today, that we are a socio-ecological model. And this is that a way of representing that visually. The idea is that there's systems upon systems, and that when we go downstream and focus on symptoms and try to focus at the individual level, that we miss the opportunity to have long-term change. And we've been doing that too long. That we've got to look at ways of looking at all the systems that surround children and how we can intervene at every level. And so that's what our project attempts to do, to really look at multiple levels with the same messaging at different levels. So one of the handouts that we've shared with you is more information about why trauma-informed practice is so important in childcare. There are lots of ways we've been talking about trauma-informed care and from trauma-informed practice, and childcare generally hasn't been one of them. So we're really trying to bring that lens to think about, in these settings, what can we do to raise awareness and promote trauma-informed practice. So these are the reasons that we know. We know that ACEs and trauma, which are two different things, are common in early childhood, and most people don't think that. We know that the adults who raise and care for young children provide foundational relationships. We often don't think about that when we think about the childcare setting. We think about that with parents, but not in childcare. And we know that the stress and challenges faced by the childcare workforce makes it very difficult for them to provide relationship-based care. So we're going to share some data with you to help you see the problems that we see.
So I don't know how many of you all have heard about ACEs. I hope all of you, but possibly some of you have not. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides, but it's based on a large scale study, really beginning to understand way back in the 90s, how adversity in childhood links to later challenges across the lifespan in every area of our lives and functioning at a population level. So diving in specifically for the youngest folks, you can see from this slide that when we look at child maltreatment by age group, the largest number of kids that are showing up in child welfare with child maltreatment experiences are those youngest kids, age 0 to 3. We also know that that maltreatment can really have long-term repercussions, because we know those are the years when brains are growing the most rapidly, when children are starting to learn attachment relationships and feel that connection with their caregivers, and where all of that foundation is being laid for their future development. So disruptions in that time and danger and stress responses in that time can really be disruptive. And what we know is that 25%, more than 25% of confirmed child abuse and neglect involve children under 3, most commonly under 1 year of age. And of children who experience domestic violence, who witness domestic violence in their homes, 60% are under the age of 6 at the time of exposure. So that tells you that a large number of the young ones in early care are going to be those who have experienced adversity, who've experienced some experience of trauma in their young lives. And by parent report, you also see this. So that the previous slide was speaking directly to child welfare data. So that requires that there's actually a report made to child welfare. But when parents are asked directly, has your child experienced or witnessed something traumatic? 26% of those parents say that yes, before the age of 4, my child has witnessed or experienced a traumatic event. And for children living in poverty, it's nearly half. That's a huge number. And 2/3 of those traumatic events involve interpersonal violence. So think about how that's going to impact relationship development and comfort and the ability to relax that stress response when you're trying to connect with another human being. Now, what you see here in the bottom box here speaks directly to that ACEs study that I mentioned, that ACEs research study. And what they found in that study was that as our number of adverse events climbs between 0 and 10, the likelihood of negative outcomes also increases. So this is a specific example of a person with a score of 4 as a young child would be 4.7 times as likely to use drugs and 7.4 times as likely to be an alcoholic when they grow up. That's a small example from that study. Go ahead, Ennis. But what we know is that that study, while critical for laying the groundwork for us understanding the long-term implications of experiences of adversity in childhood, it didn't ask about every kind of adversity that a person could experience. It asked about disruption in the household. It asked about experiences of child abuse and child neglect. But think about, look at this picture. We love this picture because it really helps you to see all of the areas of adversity that someone might experience. So inside that tree, you've got specific household factors. You know, do I have a family member who's been incarcerated, or a caregiver who's experiencing mental illness or substance use? Have I experienced domestic violence or child abuse and neglect? But then we move down into the roots, into the groundwater, into the environmental experiences in our communities. And we start to think about racism and discrimination. We start to think about poverty and homelessness, schools that don't have the resources and the teachers that they need to have, historical trauma that's built over the generations and across the cycles multi-generationally. Food insecurity. And then we move into the environment and we think about natural disasters, we think about climate change, and we think about the pandemic and how hard of all of this, like macro environment stress has taken its toll on all of us. So these layer upon each other. And the implications of this for long-term development can be really strong if we don't take the effort in advance to build those relationships, to build that resilience, and to try to minimize this stress as much as we can from the environment.
Sharon.
So as we look at the national data, thinking about some things that actually happened pre-COVID in early childhood. So we see what the average hourly wage is for childcare teachers is $10.72 an hour, that there are a great deal of early childhood staff that receive some form of public assistance. Then we see a shift even that as of December of 2020, 69% of childcare administrators report problems with recruiting and retaining staff. However, this was actually factual before COVID. So now where are we? Our childcare systems are in crisis. Again, prior to the pandemic, the childcare workforce was under-resourced, undervalued, and overwhelmed. And additionally, infant toddler teachers made less salaries than preschool teachers. Since the pandemic, we know that they've been on the front lines, navigating risk and uncertainty, and taking responsibility for the nurturance, education, health, and safety of children. Every day, our early childhood professionals, our teachers, they are stressed. They confront this every day, not being paid a living wage or having employee-sponsored health benefits or sick leave. And teachers are still leaving the field, even currently now, even more so. Even those who are in early childhood associate degree programs and bachelor degree programs, they're dropping from the field. So in your particular areas of the state, what type of things are you seeing? If you would like to share, you can please post it in the chat box at this time.
Thank you, Sharon. So when we started this project, we were overwhelmed with the amount of stress that we encountered in every level of the childcare systems, that people were, again, prior to the pandemic, really feeling undervalued and overwhelmed, and finding ways to work jobs making more money with much less stress. Generally, in most communities, you can make more working at Walmart or in fast food than you do working in childcare. So the people who have hung in there and worked in those conditions do it because they love what they do. They love being with kids and they can't imagine themselves doing it any other way. But we've been taking advantage of them for too long, and not just in North Carolina. Really, this is a national crisis that we need to pay attention to the people who are taking care of our babies and give them the working conditions that they deserve. So that was the backdrop that came before ITTI Care.
And I'm seeing in the chat, just to reflect on all of this, exactly what we've been seeing in the field as well. So many spots are open, so many administrators having to fill in, and then having so much extra work to do once they get home in the evenings. Just not enough staff out there, and a lot of turnover that keeps kids from having that consistent person in their lives, that attachment person who they're really forming that relationship with. It's extremely challenging. And those who are still in the field are struggling with the income and with the fears for their health and safety as well. So we hope that this has given you a little bit of a picture of why something like trauma-informed care might be important in early childhood. And I have been working in the field of trauma-informed practices in several different aspects of care across children's lifespan for many years now, but I was doing more things from preschool and older. And I really, really wanted to come back into this early childhood when we know that so much of that foundation is being built. And so I was very happy to see in 2017-18 that Teresa Rodersheimer and the Division of Child Development and Early Education here in North Carolina invited funds for innovative practices for infants and toddlers. And so I sat down with Marcia Baslow, who's the executive director for Child Care Services Association, and we put our heads together about how we could build a model to bring this trauma-informed care, this trauma-informed practices into infant toddler classrooms, into the youngest groups, and to the workforce who so much need that support and care. And fortunately, I was able to meet Ennis Baker, who is just been in this field forever and knows all of the things about early childhood that I did not have as much experience with at that time. And we began our planning. And so our first year, we had a planning team from across several different organizations and early childhood groups come together and think about, what is ITTI Care going to look like? How are we going to build this model? How are we going to bring this not just to teachers, but thinking more broadly to directors, to the TA field, to their supervisors, all the way through, so that it would be a multi-level, really embedded in the current infrastructure kind of a model. We were ended that year with a sense of how we wanted to move forward and a curriculum that we wanted to use, and we're able to pilot that with 5 infant toddler specialists in 2019 and 20. And they started implementation in their child care centers. We did long and intensive training with them in the fall. And right in January, they started working in their childcare centers, and then the pandemic hit. So right when they were getting in there to do that in-person coaching and support in the classroom, we all went virtual, as you well remember. So we've shifted the way that we do this work, but we have still found that there are many ways that we can bring training, support, wellness, and coaching to the teachers, to the directors, and to the whole early childhood community. So we're now expanded this year with 10 early childhood coaches that are more broad, not just those infant toddler specialists, but they include childcare health consultants and community college early childhood faculty, so that we can have, again, a broader group of early childhood professionals who are thinking deeply about this work and how to embed it in what they already do so well every day with this workforce.
So this is an image that we developed over time to try to convey what our theory of change for our model. And it's a lot of words, but one of the ways we ask people to think about it is it's really broadening and thinking about all the levels of the system that need to be impacted in order to promote child resilience. So in the early stages of this project, it was more envisioned as sort of the just about children and teachers. And not thinking about the director's role as much, or the systems around the director that are trying to support the childcare community, working either directly with the director or directly with the teachers. And then the systems above that. So we really broadened out our way of thinking. The more we got into understanding the problem, the more we brainstormed with the folks who are closest to the problems to come up with solutions. And this is what it looks like today. We think this is an important way to convey the complexity and how many levels we are attempting to hit with all that we have to share. So we think this parable, which some of you may have already heard of, is a good one for thinking about this idea of multi-systems and upstream solutions, of really shifting the way we think about problems and looking up and looking at where's the top of the problem instead of what are the symptoms of the problem. And so as you're watching this short video, I ask you to think about where you see yourself in this video, which one of the people represents where you are in the field of how you see a problem and how you approach that problem. And then we'll talk about it briefly afterwards.
There was once a carpenter that lived by a river in a village near you. Every day, with his trusty hammer, he built boats out of wood. One day, as the carpenter was working, he looked out onto the river and saw a child trying to swim towards the shore. "Help," said the child, "the current is too strong." So the carpenter grabbed a boat and rescued the child. "How did you get into the river?" asked the carpenter. "I fell in upstream," said the child. The next day, when the carpenter looked out onto the river, he saw 2 children struggling to swim towards the shore. "Help," the children said. The carpenter called out to another villager, and together they rescued the children. But the next day, there were 5 children, and the next day, there were 12, and soon the whole village was busy rescuing children from the river. The villagers grew weary, and some of the boats started to leak and break from overuse. The carpenter worked tirelessly to repair them, but as the number of children in the river grew, soon there weren't even enough boats to get the job done. One day, the carpenter asked himself a question. Why and how are so many children falling into the river in the first place? So he bravely ran upstream to find out. There, he saw a big, windy village with many houses, and some of the houses were in a state of disrepair. And when the wind blew especially hard, the houses creaked and cracked, and things were swept out of them and into the nearby river. Sometimes what was swept up was children. The carpenter saw an old lady walking by. "Excuse me," he said to the old lady, "tell me, why are these houses so broken down? Why aren't these houses stronger?" "The people of this village want to fix these houses so that they can resist the wind," the old lady replied. "But we do not have the tools to do so, and the wind lately has been especially strong." "I can help," said the carpenter. And with the help of the old lady, he gathered the villagers, gave them his hammer, and taught them how to use it so that they could learn to make their houses strong when the wind blew especially hard and keep their children from falling into the river. Yay! Because you see, if we make the effort to go upstream and help build strong foundations there, we won't need to work so hard to rescue children downstream.
So some of you may have already seen that or heard it without the visuals. We think the visuals are particularly powerful, and this is one of the links that are in your handout if you would like to use this in your work. So for those of you who may see yourself as the carpenter, somebody who is seeing children or teachers just floundering and struggling and trying to rescue them, you know how close to burnout you can get in those roles. Earlier in my career, I was both a teacher and felt that way, a home visitor and felt that way, and experienced that feeling of there's never enough of me to go around, and there's so many problems, there's so much poverty, there's so many kids who have so many things they're struggling with. And so the idea of giving relief to those people who are leaving the profession because it's too hard to just see the problem over and over and not be able to affect change is something we're paying more attention to and thinking about. How do we listen more to the old woman who for me represents wisdom of communities? How do we listen better? How do we engage the villagers? How do we get everybody involved? How do we look at our models and our strategies and the problems and help us understand them and find the right solutions that are system-wide solutions, not symptom-focused reactions to symptoms. So one of the ways we think about that is to help more organizations become trauma-informed themselves, so that the organizations that employ the people at every level of early childhood systems shifting towards becoming a more trauma-informed organization. And the link here will share much more about this concept with you. This has not been applied to the childcare community very often. Much more has been looked at in terms of big county-wide organizations or healthcare. But thinking about it in the childcare level is crucial to getting us to recognize how all the systems that surround the childcare centers and childcare and family childcare homes are on somewhere on this continuum. In addition to the center themselves or the childcare program, all the other organizations that are trying to offer support are somewhere on this continuum. And it also emphasizes that trauma-informed is the goal we all want to get to, but you don't get there by going to one workshop. You don't get there by reading one article. It's a process. And many people are starting from that trauma reactive space where they haven't even talked about it. They haven't even been introduced to it. To be able to move to being trauma informed, you got to go through the stages. And that isn't fast and it isn't easy. And what we want to do is support organizations in identifying where are you now, and how can we help you move forward around this concept? What kind of support can we offer you to help you move forward? So one of the things I want to ask, if there's anyone in the audience today who has worked with us and wants to share their perspective on any of the things we're going to be sharing today, we'd love to read your words. I wish we could hear your voices. So please feel free to chime in if you've had the experience in another way other than working with us around the idea of implementing trauma-informed practice. So in general, this is our model. This is the model we bring to all those levels, whether it's organizations or professionals, and the classroom all the way through the systems that we touch, is starting with you and thinking about how are you doing? How are you? And what do you know about yourself? And then move into thinking about relationships and how those relationships can strengthen your ability to take care of yourself and understand yourself. And through those relationships, now that you understand yourself and understand the importance of taking care of yourself, how can you use those relationships to pass that on? So we do a lot of work around giving people the experience and asking them to pass it on and supporting them in passing it on. And who better to do that than coaches and in the childcare community who are offering that support in multiple settings across communities. We emphasize the importance of leading with equity and demonstrating your commitment to leading with equity by being humble, by approaching things with cultural humility and thinking about how to be responsive to different cultures and build relationship across differences. And talking about stress, raising the importance of talking about stress and not expecting stress to be something that individuals cope with, but that organizations can cope with as well. So you'll hear more from each of us about how this looks in our project, but we wanted you to get a sense of this is where whoever we're working with, this is what we're thinking. These are the ways we're trying to impact and offer support to support them on becoming more trauma informed.
And now I want y'all to take a look at some of these concepts on the screen and think about which ones do you really feel like you understand well, and feel free to put those in the chat. Because what we want to do is we really want to draw connections of figuring out what have you already heard, where have you heard it from, are there any words on here that remind you of previous trainings that you've had? And we kind of use all of these different concepts in ITTI. So we don't want to come up with anything new or reinvent the wheel. It's kind of connecting all of these different concepts together. So feel free to put any of those that stand out to you in the chat.
The other thing we emphasize is if you've been exposed to one or more of these things, then you're halfway there. You've got a lot to work with. And so because we often encounter the issue of people feeling like I can't do one more thing, we want to connect to what people already know and build on that and help them see the connection so it doesn't feel so overwhelming to learn something new.
And in addition, think about how you use these in your day-to-day practices as well.
Whoops, sorry, skipped ahead.
Yep, I'm seeing a lot of resilience. I'm glad.
They're really all just parts of the elephant, right? That
Yeah.
we're all touching a different part of the elephant, but it's really all one core concept. But I'm glad many of you seem to have heard of many of these terms already and had some experience with them.
Great. So as we look at the ITTI Care project, looking at the big ideas, the trauma-informed practice starts with you. Self-care, that's one of the big ticket items I would say in the ITTI Care project. When we're coaching the me first, the self-care model, talking with our participants about compassion, satisfaction, self-regulation, and also recognizing that creating trauma-informed environments requires a paradigm shift on every level, our community level, our systems level, organizations, and individually.
And as we're thinking about the big ideas that we have, the sequence of them is really important. So just like Sharon said, really starting with you and making that first part of the sequence, and then being more aware of the problems, and then building awareness of that science and prevention and intervention before moving into action. And one of the things that you'll notice is that the second block, we talk about understanding trauma and stress and brain development. We actually adapted that during COVID. So we focused less on child trauma and ACEs and more on adult wellness and understanding the stress response system, because we know with the pandemic, everybody's stress level was already really high, and really just recognizing the power of those healthy relationships to heal and protect. So that's something that we've found, I know Sharon and I have found as coaches, is that even without meeting any of our coachees in person, we're able to build that relationship virtually as much as we can by helping them to feel held and heard and really focusing on the importance of that relationship.
So this image has become, and we may be tweaking it a little bit, so stay tuned for possible updates, but this image has become a really central visual of what the ITTI Care project is trying to do out there in the community with all of the early childhood workforce. And so let me start by telling you where this image came from and how we came to this. I worked several years ago with Desiree Murray and Christina Christopoulos and the Administration for Children and Families to study the impacts of toxic stress on self-regulation. And we read thousands of articles. They basically said to us, we would like for you to review all of the interventions available to build self-regulation from birth through young adulthood and give us a review of what you find. And let me tell you that when you're trying to investigate every intervention for self-regulation across development, it's a lot. So we read thousands of articles, and really when we boiled them all down to their core components, these circles are what we came to. And so I like to think of this as kind of a solar system. And that middle circle is the sun in the very center of the solar system. And all of the other circles are the planets that are revolving around it, orbiting it. And if that sun burns out, everything else is going to fly off into space. We've got to keep that core the strongest of the whole system if we're going to be successful. So that start with you in the very center is always going to be our most important core. And it's always surprising to the childcare teachers when we come into the room and really want to talk to them about how they're doing. They're like, well, I brought my charts about how I set my class up. What are you talking about? And we're really trying to give them that experience of, we just want to know how you are. How can we support you? Let's just get to know each other. So that always, I think, is a surprise and a relief, and something that they really enjoy. So you'll see that next circle out there is that building warm relationships, because once we've got ourselves taken care of, we really need to reach out to all the relationships within the center, not just the teacher and the child, but the teacher and the co-teacher, or the director, or the parents, or the director and the technical assistance provider who's coming in. Every relationship that's touching that center is impacting both that workforce and those children in that room. Certainly structuring calm environments so that we are in a space that allows us to relax our stress response system and take a breath and feel safe. Responding with warmth during stress, that's all about that co-regulation. How do we help young children to take that breath and settle down and feel safe with us, because we're taking some of that stress with them and helping them to settle. And then certainly working closely with parents and building that sense of community, both within the center so that we're a family, and outside of the center so that we have that community to fall back on, to give us support so that we're not in this all alone as a child care center. And what you see on the right side of this screen are 3 different documents that came out of that big project with the Administration for Children and Families, that are tip sheets. And there's for specific age groups. There's one for infants, one for toddlers, and one for preschoolers. And they're specifically walking through strategies and ideas and links to resources for each of these 6 circles for each of those age groups. And so you should have in your handout of the slides, as well as our extra materials, links to those tip sheets if you want to look at them. But we'll show you the first page of one of them, or one page of one of them. This is an example of just walking through those 6 rings in terms of how we can support that within an early childhood classroom. So here you see on the side, it defines co-regulation as that warm and responsive interaction and support that we're giving in a classroom with a child, that relationship-based interaction. And there's an example of how we can implement start with you in an infant classroom. How can we establish that warm and responsive relationship, build that structured environment, use co-regulation to help a baby settle, work closely with parents, and build that sense of community. And there are several links within this document to other resources that are already out there, because again, we don't need to recreate the wheel. We want to guide you to all that great stuff that exists out there. So check those out if you're interested. And again, there's one for each of those 3 age groups.
Another core resource that we have relied on is the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard, which I hope all of you have had experience with that website. They're amazing, both things to read and short videos to learn from and use in your work. Dr. Jack Shonkoff is the leader of that organization, and they have really been a core resource for so many of us in the early childhood field. But this is one of their messages that has not been as well known. And so it fits really well with our project of thinking about all the things to focus on, the place that we know that what the science tells us of where we need to be focusing on to make big changes for children and families. So what they encourage us to do is to think about this idea with existing systems, And one of the things we all have to take the opportunity to do as systems that have been disrupted by the pandemic are being rebuilt and repaired and reimagined is to use messages like this that come from the science of understanding what do we need to do? How can we align with these concepts of these three principles? Support responsive relationships for children and adults. How can each of the systems at each level do that? How can they reduce sources of stress in the lives of children and families and the workforce? And strengthen core life skills. So there's so much that's included in your handout to learn from this organization, but we're gonna watch a video that they produced because we think it says it better than we could and hope you'll agree. So here's a short video from the center.
Moving forward as a society depends on children developing to their full potential, and the science of early childhood development can help us figure out the best ways to make this happen. There's a lot of science to draw from: molecular biology, neuroscience, genomics, and behavioral health. So figuring out how we can actually use all this knowledge can be a big challenge. But out of all of that science, we know that early childhood environments and experiences, even those before birth, shape our learning capacities, behaviors, and physical and mental health across the lifespan. That is huge. Even better, we can identify 3 key principles that anyone can use to better support developing children and the adults who care for them. And that's where you come in. As a community leader, policymaker, or practitioner, you bring your own knowledge, experience, and expertise to this challenge. And you can use these scientific principles to get better outcomes for the families you care about. Think of the principles as a guiding star. They can help you design better programs, practices, and services, and point you towards what's most important for helping children and families thrive. Principle 1, support responsive relationships. Responsive serve and return interaction between adults and young children builds healthy brain architecture. Relationships help adults deal with life's challenges and help children build resilience. In fact, having stable, responsive relationships with committed adults is the single most common factor in children who develop the capacity to overcome serious hardship in life. Principle 2, strengthen core life skills. The essential skills we all need to successfully manage life, work, and relationships are learned through coaching and practice, starting in the earliest years and continuing into adulthood. Known as executive function and self-regulation skills, these crucial capabilities support our ability to focus, adapt to change, resist impulsive behaviors, plan ahead, and achieve goals. Principle 3, reduce sources of stress. Millions of children and families experience severe stress every day caused by things like poverty, community violence, racism, substance abuse, mental illness, and more. Excessive unrelenting stress can be both disruptive and destructive for kids and adults. So doing everything we can about the sources of that stress is key. All of these principles are connected. Responsive relationships are one of the best ways to reduce stress and practice skills in a playful way. When we have less stress, we're better able to focus on people and skill building instead of putting out fires. And core life skills can help us find solutions to challenging situations, giving us the time and energy for relationships. By applying these science by design principles, our policies, programs, and services can create the conditions and experiences that support child development at all levels, for the individual, in the community, and across society. Follow that guiding star, and you'll be on the path to better outcomes for every child and family.
So we encourage you to learn more about these 3 principles and think about how you could use them in your community to affect change, to go in the direction of what science is telling us we need to do to be more efficient and be more effective with limited resources and achieve the outcomes that children and families deserve. So we're going to spend some time giving you a sense of kind of some pieces of our project and what they look like, to help you get a sense of what we do and what it looks like. And what we think of is these are our 3 building blocks. These are the things that Many people are doing one or two of these things, but haven't enough brought the three together to really recognize how interdependent they are. And in order to be successful in one of these things and being culturally responsive, you have to also be successful in the other two areas. So we can't leave one out, and too often that happens. And so we really want to broaden people's understanding of this. To be effective, we have to look outside of the narrow field that we may be in and broaden our understanding of the other things that are out there and how they complement each other.
And the first building block that we want to highlight is the cultural responsiveness piece. So this is that cultural humility in addition to the cultural competence. So for example, thinking about how aware are you of your culture and how do you perceive the world? And if you're interacting with a teacher or a director, if you are a teacher interacting with a child, how do they perceive the world differently because of their culture? And being able to kind of take a step back and understand where they might be coming from with their culture and be able to respond in a way that's culturally responsive. And also for myself, I am a licensed therapist and also an early childhood mental health consultant. And a lot of times when I would go into classrooms, some of the things that I would be asked to use or things I would ask to be looking for or are not as much focused on the relationship piece. And so when thinking about that relationship piece, that is kind of embedded into the infant and early childhood mental health piece. And really thinking about that attachment relationship. So a lot of times when we think about attachment relationships with young children, we think mostly about the parent or caregiver that's in the home, and really wanting to switch that to think about the teacher really being that secure base and that healthy attachment for that child. And a lot of times I know that centers will struggle with switching teachers around constantly. And every time that teacher is switched, it really disrupts that relationship. And how important that is to a young child's development. And then finally, the trauma-informed practices, principles, and approaches. So kind of going back to how can we do this in a way that is trauma-informed for everyone? And just like Ennis said, all of these separately are great and very important, but it's really difficult to be effective at one if you're not all in. So being effective at all of them and being successful, you've got to think about all three of these building blocks.
Another building block that we look at in the ITTI project is integrating best practices approaches. As you can see, we use information from the three principles: mindfulness, reflective supervision, motivational interviewing, practice-based coaching, and also information from NACE, the diversity informed tenets, and the advancing equity in early childhood education documents. We also build upon relationship practices, strengthening families, frameworks, and protective factors. This is our core textbook. The Trauma-Informed Practices for Early Childhood Educators, an excellent textbook that we use with our coaches and with ourselves. In addition to this, we also use the No Small Matter film. We use the film Resilience and many other video resources. These resources strengthen us as professionals. I'm also a community college instructor in early childhood and program director. These practices have enhanced my work, and we can certainly see how it has enhanced the work of our coaches and the teachers and directors that we support in the ITTI project.
Thank you, Sharon. So we're going to give you a link to that book. Don't worry, we want you to get your hands on it. It's a great resource. So look at the end for links to that book. So this is getting into some of the nitty gritty. We really want you to think about what our project looks like on the ground. And so this is what we have done so far. So we worked with 9 different early childhood education support system organizations. So those would include local partnerships for children. Those would include CCR&Rs. Those would include community colleges. And also the child care health consultant systems that are growing, thank goodness, across our state. So we want to broadly touch multiple organizations and have been successful in connecting with them. And then the coaches that are employed by those organizations, many of whom don't call, like none of them, I don't think, have the word coach in their title. We call them coaches. They have lots of different titles because what they all do is some form of coaching. So the organizations that are committed to working with us, we have incentivized that commitment to working with us by providing free training for them and consultation, again, to help them on that continuum of where are you in the continuum and how can we help you meet your goals for how you want to grow towards becoming a more trauma-informed organization. One of the ways we did that is offering reflective supervision training to the supervisors of the coaches in our project, and not just training, but training plus coaching. That is something we want to say loud and clear, is there's no problem that training alone is going to fix. There has to be training plus ongoing conversations, supportive conversations with people you're in relationships with to help that operationalize that training, help that training come to life in your work. And so with everything we do that is training, we build in ongoing coaching to support the individual in growing their skills in that area. And then each of the coaches nominated a center. They chose the centers that they wanted to work with. And they're responsible for providing a minimum number of hours of coaching for those sites. And the focus is on infant, toddler, and twos classrooms. So they're working with the director who's supporting the center as a whole, but also with a focus on at least three classrooms that are all serving children under 3. And we have had to, we did this not knowing a pandemic was coming, and have had to shift so much of it from being in person. Virtually all of it is virtual now. So we've had to figure out how to do what we said we would do, but do it through a screen, which has added a whole nother level of complexity. So the centers that we have worked with thus far represent all corners of the state. We have not worked on the eastern part of the state. That is one of our goals that we want to do in our next cohort. But this year, we are in 10 different communities, all of which would be considered rural and lower population density than most in North Carolina. So we are loving this opportunity to support the corners of our state that get less attention. And the centers in these that we're working with have chosen to be a part of the project. They have to want this. And they were nominated by their coach who has a relationship with them and felt that they were ready for this opportunity. And they had to have at least 3 infant, toddler, and twos classrooms, which, as you probably know, is unfortunately a problem in our state, that there are not enough infant, toddler, and twos classrooms. And so it was a challenge to find centers who were ready to do this work, who also had that number of classrooms. And one of the hallmarks we always want to shout out about is this incentive we added of having an all staff work day. So like a staff retreat that many of us take for granted that we get in our professional lives, but that the childcare community does not. So asking them to close down for a day so that we could provide the budget and help them to structure that day to meet the needs of their center, to both provide some learning opportunities, but also really build relationships and strengthen relationships within the center. So you'll see listed here what some of our incentives are. That includes money to reimburse for substitutes so that the teachers can be out of the classroom to work with their coaches. A 2-day director's retreat, so the directors get that intensive support with their colleagues from across the state. Offering a tablet to each classroom that they can use to do that virtual coaching with their coach in the project. And a stipend for each classroom to purchase materials that the coach and the teachers and the directors agree is what this classroom needs to be more trauma informed. And that has ranged dramatically from things that like a little area in the classroom that's more cozy and gives children a space to get away from all the busyness of a classroom setting, or in a teacher's lounge that gives teachers more of a space to get away from the busyness of the center and have some time to themselves, not surrounded by boxes and toys and children. Which often spaces are in centers. And also really thinking about the needs for teachers to be more comfortable in the space. How can they be more comfortable when they're at work? So it's really been a broad list of things that were developed by each center that are very different and unique for each of the centers. And we'll be happy to talk with you more about what all of that looks like.
So with our 20 centers that we've had so far, 10 in our first cohort and 10 in our second cohort, click one more time. There we go. We are really focusing on these messages that we're not even using the word trauma with them so much. We're talking about stress. We all experience stress, and we want to build an environment that both for the staff and for the children and families feels safe and comfortable, that it reduces stress as much as possible. We want that environment to feel welcoming for all children and families and for all staff. So we're nurturing those relationships, we're strengthening that well-being and reducing stress. And we're really doing that with a key focus on communication and collaboration so that we're building connections. We're constantly building connections across the staff, between the staff and families, between the child care center and the community, so that there are lots of resources available to work together. And I think it's really important, so they're going to be getting a lot of this intensive support from this coach that's coming in to work with the director and with the teachers as well. But this is really in a strength building prevention kind of way. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, the trauma-informed part means that people understand how stress and trauma can impact our brains and our bodies and our behaviors. But this is really a prevention model that is not going to come in and assess everybody for how many stress factors they've experienced, not going to come in and do a test to understand what my ACE score is. We're going to assume that everyone's got some stress in their lives, that everyone's going through a hard time, and we're going to respond by trying to reduce that stress, strengthen those relationships, and build that resilience for everyone universally. The next thing that I do when I go in and first introduce this project to centers is talk with them about evaluation, because we certainly are trying to learn more about how this is going for folks. We want to see what's going well, what needs more improvement. We want to keep at this and keep tweaking it as we go. And we certainly have already with the pandemic. But these are a few of the things that we're including in our evaluation. First of all, we want to see where that center and those staff are at the beginning. What practices and policies are in place in that center? What stresses and strengths do the director and the teachers bring to that center every day? So we start with a readiness assessment. I do an interview with the director. I do surveys with each of the teachers in these infant and toddler classes and twos to understand how they're doing, what's stressful in their day, and what things that the center is doing well to support them. And with organizations, moving up a step from the center to the organizations that support our coaches in early childhood, we also try to work with them on a self-assessment. What do you all know about trauma-informed care? What do you know about culturally responsive practices? How can we support you in learning and implementing strategies in those areas? And then we're also doing a pre-post assessment to see what changes we can look at across our time, our 6 or so months of working with each classroom. So we have the teachers complete surveys, including a stress inventory and a resilience scale, ratings about the center practices and their knowledge of trauma-informed care topics. We then, with parent consent, see if the teachers can fill out 2 forms for each child in their classroom that has that parent consent. We look at children's emerging vocabulary, both expressive and receptive vocabulary. And we look at their social emotional development using the Devereaux, the DECA, infant and toddler survey. So we have them fill out those 2 at the beginning and the end of the project to see if we see change in how that child is doing at a percentile level in those times. And again, the teachers, we want to really encourage that we're supporting wellness. We're not using time outside of the regular job without compensating that time. So we're trying to give them this extra funds to thank them for the time they spend doing that. What we were doing prior to the pandemic, and hope that we will do again post-pandemic, is have the parents also fill out both of those surveys on their kids at the beginning and end of the project, and then also have an observer to go in and do either the class or the tippy toes as an observation in the classroom at the beginning and the end of the project, again, to try and see what changes that we see over time. So I hope that we've given you some sense of some of the nitty gritty. It's such a tiered approach that there are a lot of details that we haven't thrown in, but they're in some of the materials that you get as handouts. But we want to dive in a little bit to 2 of our primary strategies so that you can get a taste of what we're trying to accomplish in these classrooms.
And again, that first primary one is the starting with you piece. So like Katie was saying before, this is our core, this is our sun. And if this falls out, then everything else kind of falls out around it. And so when you're starting with you, there's a lot of nuances that come with that too. Thinking about yourself as more of a garden instead of a machine of, I have to do these specific things to start with me each day, or these specific things that I need for self-care. And thinking more like a garden of, some days you might need a little bit of water, some days you might need more sun, some days you might need less water. You need different things on different days, and just really being attuned to that specific thing that you need. Our bodies are designed like that for a purpose. And so with that start with you piece, we really want to focus on being able to reflect on what you might need and being aware of that, and then being able to take care of yourself with that. And when we say self-care, it doesn't necessarily have to mean, oh, I get manis and petties every week and what that might look like. It could be just as simple as saying, saying no to something that you don't have time to do, or setting boundaries that are appropriate for you. And there are a lot of different things that you can do with that starting with you piece. And also the environments and relationships that we're in, they really need to support us in our self-care and integrating that into the workday. So it's really important. We are structuring our project in a way that teachers and directors, they are getting that the permission to take care of themselves during the workday. And it's also just so interconnected that you really can't do one well without doing the other, with all these 3 different parts within the start with you piece. And so for this, for y'all, I know a lot of y'all said about noticing resilience and maybe seeing the resilience film. If you recognize, there's Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris that's on the resilience film, and she actually has her new role of Surgeon General in California. And it's really exciting. We absolutely just love, I loved hearing her TED Talk and all of the different ways. And in the movie, you'll remember that she recommended 6 ways to promote resilience. And now she's actually added a 7th. So that 7th is the access to nature. And if you haven't heard of her or don't know anything about her, please feel free to go look at her TED Talk. And we've got those materials. Jessica's put the access to those on the chat. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the pyramid model. So for y'all that are familiar with the pyramid model, really promoting that social emotional competence for early childcare, we really want to focus most on the bottom of the pyramid. So not really at that top, and thinking about the effective workforce. So a lot of times when people hear trauma informed, they really are thinking about that top part of the pyramid, that really intensive intervention for those that have severe persistent behavior problems. But those bottom parts are really neglected. And so we really, really want to focus on the effective workforce, but also above that, the nurturing and responsive relationships, and then the high quality supportive environments, but we're not focusing on those top 2s. And also when you're looking at a lot of some of these rating scales that if you're in a childcare center asked to do, a lot of that tends to draw people up more towards the top. And we really want to connect and show that, especially the building blocks that we've talked about before, and the data shows that people of color are really having less supports on that bottom piece, especially, and less fairness. And a lot of what y'all were saying earlier in the chat is that, this is what's been happening since the pandemic with childcare centers that we've noticed. And it's because a lot of them are having the burden of a lot of things that have come with the pandemic and even before the pandemic that are built on those foundations that just aren't strong enough. And so also thinking about with this pyramid model, we ask ourselves, have we been effective in adopting and sustaining the necessary systems and policies? So that's kind of part of that effective workforce place. And from what we shared so far, it would be no, we really need to go back and look at our systems and see how they can shift. And being effective is really, right now, it seems to be a lot about productivity and not really aligning with the importance of the workforce that's really being taken care of. And And our project is really expanding into relationships of how do we keep people staying in relationship building and strengthening faith for longer, and don't just assume, oh yeah, we've got the relationship piece covered, and pushing past that. And so a lot of what Sharon and I have been doing in our coaching is really getting people to slow down and really move into building that relationship piece before any kind of teaching or any kind of talking with them about anything else, is really building on that strong foundation of relationship.
So as learning our work with our coaches and thinking about trauma-informed care, that usually when the people hear the word trauma, they think of pain, they think of suffering, they think of the emergency room, they think of doctors, and they're thinking of the intense part of the pyramid. But when we're looking at trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices, there's so much more to that. So if we look at that, it is the adoption of principles and practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. So trauma-informed practices means so much more. It means far less about the pain and the hurt and more about the science of hope and healing. It helps people feel heard and held. So think about the times how you help someone in your current role feel heard and held. Now, one of the tests of a trauma-informed approach is, does it help people feel heard and held? And how is feeling heard different from feeling held? And some of the things that we do to support this is to let people know that we value them. I value you. I understand you. I appreciate you. You're important and you matter. In the ITTI project, staff have a voice in planning retreats. We have staff awareness activities. Our coaches and ourselves, we check in on staff. And again, we build all of that foundation on self-care. We also use surveys, private surveys that our participants can use. All of these things so that they can feel heard and held.
And we wanted to ask you all to take a minute and thinking about this concept of a person in your life or a time in your life, in your personal life, where you felt this feeling of feeling that you matter, that you are important, and that the person really understands you. So we want to give you a few seconds just to remember that moment. Hopefully you have many of those experiences. But hold on to one for a minute and just remember how that felt. Some of you may go back to a childhood memory. Some of you may have felt that way this morning. So if you're able to find that moment and feel that feeling, now I'd like you to think about, have you had that same experience of feeling that feeling at work? And if so, what was that like? I think during the pandemic has given lots of opportunities for leaders of organizations and supervisors to figure out how to take care of staff, how to talk about working from home, how to figure out what's fair, how to ask people what they need and not assume. So there's been lots of tests across our system of how do you respond to something that nobody expected and nobody's ever had before, and do it in a way that doesn't result in staff leaving their jobs or not communicating. That you want to stay connected, you want to build relationships even when a threat like a pandemic or a funding cut where people are having to make decisions about jobs. There's so many threats in the world of scarcity that the early childhood systems depend upon. It's so important that leaders of organizations hold this in their mind. And we talk to lots of leaders who this is one of their biggest stresses through their pandemic is, how do I take care of my staff? How do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my family? How do I take care of my staff? So this example here on the right was a voice of a teacher at the FPG Inclusion Institute that we did a similar presentation for them last year, and asked the same question of them if there were any teachers in the audience who could share the experience of feeling heard and held at work. And I'm just going to read this to you to have the voice of this teacher hopefully come through. I'll attempt to channel it. This was her response. When I taught second grade, I taught the students that sometimes when their friends are feeling upset, we can't help the situation, but we can support them. So we would practice just putting out our hands like this and letting them know we were there for them. So it was a visual way of showing literally someone feeling heard and held. We did this every day and reviewed that idea. And then when my own grandmother passed away, I told the kids, and they all just put their hands out like this and let me know that they were there for me. So I felt heard and held by my own students. Reading it makes me emotional here. You can imagine hearing it for the first time, and their entire audience felt the weight of that, and how powerful it is when you give kids the tools that they can give you this be a resource for you as an adult. And so I hope that inspires you to think about the power of children to offer this experience to adults, but also think about how unfortunately that it's not commonplace to get this experience at work.
Yeah, and now we're going to ask you in just a minute to work together in small groups of thinking about what do you already do, or what could you do to prioritize relationships. And right now, Sharon and I are just going to give some examples of ways that we've done this at multiple levels. So thinking about the classroom relationships with teachers and children. When a teacher maybe comes to somebody describing a child as being challenging, we really kind of want to first focus that on the relationship. And instead of looking at that behavior in isolation, looking at it in the context of relationships, the relationship with their parent or caregiver, their relationship with other students in the class or previous teachers, and really asking coaches to look at that behavior in the context of relationships. And also thinking about the child care center relationships. So really focusing on the director, and we have specific time set aside for our coachees to focus on the director and help them focus on themselves so they can reflect on, first of all, how they're doing, and then how are the relationships between them and the teachers. What does that look like? What do the teachers and the parents' relationship look like? And then them and the children, them and the parents. So there's relationships on every different kind of level.
So when we're looking at the early childhood education support systems, what is it that we all can bring to the table to help each other? From the coaches, those who provide technical assistance, resource and referral, community college departments, child care health consultants, infant, toddler, early childhood, and mental health consultants. Sometimes we're in the communities and we don't even know each other. But the beauty of that is that this can change. When we remove silos, we can all bring our specific gifts and causes to the table and blend them together to develop a strong early childhood education support system in the community. And when we look at the community as a whole and the larger system that involves early intervention, parenting education, home visiting, public health, etc. Again, getting the various organizations that support children and families and professions of early childhood education and bringing them together, having those courageous conversations if need be about how we can support each other for the greater good of our early childhood system of practice.
So now we want to give you all some time. We've given you some examples. We hope you've thought about things that in your community and in your work that you could do, that someone could do to bring this focus on relationships. So we're going to give you 8 minutes and you'll get a 2-minute warning at 6 minutes to know that you have 2 minutes to wrap up. And in the chat right now, you will see the guidance we have for you. So before we send you away, we want to ask you to give you another option. So this is using the same technology that you had used this morning to complete the, earlier today with the word wall. We want to give you the option of typing a little more than one word. So as you think of things that you may not want to share in your group or may not have a chance to share, or if you are not able to participate in the small group for technology reasons or any other reason, we want to give you another way to share the opportunities that you see in your community and the systems of care that you connect with most with us via this Poll Everywhere link. So same ways that we gave you earlier today. And we're going to send you off for your small groups and we'll see you in 8 minutes. Great, welcome back. Don't have a lot of time to end with you today, but what you see on your screen is for the folks who were willing to share using the Poll Everywhere link. We have some things that we can learn from and hear. So if you haven't done that already and would like to, we'd still love to read your words. I'll keep it open until tomorrow at noon. So if you have more thoughts to share, please do so. And thank you for taking that time. I wish we could have been in every room with you all. So this is just one slide reminding you of all the things we touched on today about what a trauma-informed approach looks like in our work, and that we hope you'll walk away from and think about how to bring to your work. And Katie, I'll let you do our last.
So we will continue with our evaluation with the current cohorts as we move forward. Obviously, we haven't gotten the information we'd hoped with the pandemic, but we're going to keep looking at what's going well, how we can continue to improve things, and to expand. We're hoping to have a new cohort next year and possibly expand it to classrooms serving children over 3 as well in the fall of 2021, and get some East Coast centers. We've also included a separate experience that some of the same folks have participated in called Cultivating North Carolina Early Childhood Equity Champions. That's a mouthful, but the idea is really to think about how is racial equity influencing our early childhood workforce and childcare environments, and how do we build a workforce that can really meet that struggle and brainstorm and find solutions and embed strategies to be more equitable. And we'll be repeating that experience this summer into next fall. And we will continue working with leaders and really trying to find systems level approaches that we can embed to keep this work sustainable and cross level, so that it becomes really a part of the infrastructure of the work that we're already doing, not one more thing, just a part of who we are and what we do.
Thank you, Katie. And I put in the chat the link to the book, and also to, if you are interested in applying for being a North Carolina Early Childhood Equity Champion, you'll find out more about what the eligibility is using that link. We just launched it today, so y'all are first to hear about it. And we would love to get applications from anybody who qualifies.
We'd also
Thank
love
you.
for you to fill out the evaluation survey for this session so that we can continue to work on our presentation for other audiences as well. So please do fill that out. That should be in the chat as well.
And remember that there's more, way more in the slides that are available to you in the handouts than what we were able to cover today. So make sure you download both of the handouts and let us know if you have questions.